Welcome to Live Well, Dream Big. I'm Suzanne Monroe, founder of the International Association of Wellness Professionals, where I've been teaching people how to live a life of wellness, tap into their passion, and go for their dreams for over 15 years. I believe living well and dreaming big starts with ourselves. This podcast will show you how to create a healthy, holistic life, empower your mindset, follow your dreams, and make a big impact. Let's dive in right now. Our topic today is shining a light on race-based stress and trauma, a first look within. And we're going to be exploring what race-based traumatic stress is and how it affects actually all of us, not just those who are directly impacted. We're going to talk about how it actually is different from PTSD. And we're going to talk about why wellness professionals and coaches need to understand race-based traumatic stress in their practices today. We're also going to explore self-care practices. You know, I love self-care that reduce stress and support trauma recovery, including restorative yoga and self-care practices that support psychological health and well-being and promote post-traumatic growth. Guiding us on this journey today is Dr. Gail Parker, who is a psychologist, a certified yoga therapist, a lifelong practitioner of yoga, and an author of a brand new book, which I have right here in front of me, called Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma. As you can see, I've marked up my pages, and to me, that means it's been a good book. Dr. Parker is well known for her pioneering efforts to blend psychology, yoga, and meditation, as well as effective self-care strategies that can enhance emotional balance and contribute to overall health and well-being of practitioners. Her broad expertise in behavioral health and wellness includes 40 years as a practicing psychotherapist. She is also the president of the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance Board of Directors. Dr. Parker currently instructs and mentors behavioral healthcare providers, allied healthcare providers, yoga teachers, and therapists in utilizing restorative yoga as a therapeutic intervention that reduces stress and supports recovery from emotional trauma that's associated with race-based traumatic stress injury. As the author of Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma, this is a brand new book that just came out. She describes how restorative yoga can really be used as effective as a self-care tool that can help you navigate stresses and trauma that arise from daily lived experiences associated with race. And she invites everyone, not just those directly impacted, to explore this intersection of yoga, race, and ethnicity, and to consider the psychological impact of race-based stress and trauma on health and well-being for each of us. Welcome, Dr. Parker.
Thank you. That was an amazing introduction. I'm glad.
Well, I'm so glad I had the chance to read it, and I'm so glad I have, again, your book in front of me. I have to say, I'm just about done. The A student in me was like, oh no, I still have a few pages left, and I didn't finish before the call. But as I said, very marked up, lots of things. So I know we have questions we're going to get to today. And if you guys have questions, I want you to kind of hold on to them. We're going to open up at the end for questions with Dr. Parker as our guest teacher today. So kind of jot them down, be thinking about it. But again, I'm excited you're joining me today. You know, it's really, as I was saying before we started the call, I'm excited to meet you. It's just an honor to have you here. And wow, what an important time in history to be addressing this topic. And I asked you this before the call, but I'm going to ask it now before we get into more of our detailed questions. Did you have any inclination when you were writing your book that it would be released during this pivotal time in history where we're being asked to look at race on a whole new level?
No, I had no idea. In fact, as I mentioned to you before, this book was first of all, I hadn't intended to write the book. I was exploring the topic as a psychologist and as someone who teaches various strategies, self-care strategies for supporting emotional balance, including supporting people in dealing with issues around race and ethnicity that have been injurious. But I wasn't thinking about writing a book. But what I knew is that there was not a lot of research in behavioral health and no research at all in yoga around what interventions might be supportive. So in the yoga world, for example, there's a thing that's called trauma-informed yoga. You may be aware of it, where people learn to use yoga strategies to support people who have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. But it's not the same as race-based stress and trauma. And so I wanted to take a deeper dive into all of that and to explore it because I knew that it had a positive impact because I had been teaching it. So I was asked to be a presenter at the International Association of Yoga Therapists twice. The second time I was a keynote speaker as a result of the first time. And a publisher approached me who was at the conference and said, you need to write a book on this. And I said, a book? You know, as I said, that it's a 20-minute talk, you know. She said, yeah, you need to write a book. So I wrote a proposal and submitted it. It was accepted. And the book was supposed to be published June 2021. I finished it early and submitted the manuscript in October, a year ago. And it takes the publishing company about a year after you submit a manuscript to actually publish the book. So I called the publisher and said, you know, any chance you can do this earlier? Because since I finished early, they said, no, we have this timeline that we have to honor. And a couple of weeks later, they called back and said, guess what? Something has opened up. We can publish it in June 2020. This is before any of us knew anything about anything that's currently going on right now. So we were ready for a June 2020 publication date when COVID-19 hit and everything got put on hold, including the distribution of this book, including they backed up the publication date. And I was telling Suzanne, for those of you who did not hear this part, I was telling her that I thought, you know, now that COVID-19 is primary in everyone's consciousness, this particular topic is probably going to take a back seat. Well, little did I know that that would not be the case. And so I had nothing to do with any of this. You know, I wrote the book and got it done early. That's all I can take credit for. So
yeah.
So
I love that. And I know we were saying too, like, you just never know how the universe is working and how things are going to come together. I think it's such an inspiring story, really. You take that action, you do what you're meant to do, and then things have a way of working out. And it's not always in the way that you expect it.
And it's part of the deep listening that I teach that really supports, again, health and well-being. When you learn to be still long enough for all the noise and all the mind chatter and all of the physical agitation to come to a standstill. And what I like to do is, you know, those snow globes, when you turn them up and down. I mean, that's how we are until we aren't. So I think it's a nice visual to consider that all of this agitation and these thoughts that are coming through and the feeling of wanting to jump out of your skin, which people experience, is normal. But if you can learn to just sit until everything settles, now what do you have? Clarity. And it's from that place of clarity that we want to take action.
I want to thank you for the snow globe metaphor. Behind me is my meditation space, and in it I have a small snow globe, but I've never thought about the snow globe that way. I'm going to have to use it and think of it that way. I love that.
We didn't have the visual now, so you could,
yeah.
I mean, it really is helpful to realize, oh, that's what's going on with me when I sit down to be still, to meditate, to be still. All of this is going to happen first.
Well, I know we're going to get to why we need this stillness, why we need this self-care, but let's circle back to the top and talk about what is race-based traumatic stress. I mean, to be honest, before your book, I hadn't actually heard of that term specifically. And I'm curious, and I know everybody wants to know, what exactly does that mean?
So you are not alone in not having heard of this term. Race-based traumatic stress injury is actually, it's a clinical model that was developed by Robert T. Carter, who was a professor at Columbia University teaching counseling. And he wanted to know whether or not, he wanted to understand, is there such a thing? We know there is. And what is it? What constitutes it? And how is it different from post-traumatic stress disorder? So that's all of it. Race-based traumatic stress injury, as I'm defining it, is any external race-related event that causes emotional harm that is memorable, that you remember, that that just has a profound, powerful impact on you. It is characterized by it's ongoing, it's recurrent, and it's cumulative. It is really based on behaviors that socially exclude based on race. For example, one of the stories I tell in the book, and you may be familiar with, or you may remember that a couple of years ago, 2 young men were arrested in a Starbucks for waiting for a business associate to arrive, and they declined to place an order while they waited, and the store manager called the police. The police came, handcuffed them, arrested them, held them in detention for 9 hours, had to let them go because they hadn't committed a crime. So this is an example of an event that was a big event, an event that occurred that was emotionally harmful and damaging. But it was the store manager also who was unable, apparently, I'm making this assumption, couldn't tell the difference between an internal trigger, something that triggered her inside, and an external threat. And so she called the police. And so one of the things that I think is critically important, especially around this issue of race and ethnicity, is for us to be able to tell the difference between, am I being triggered by something in me that I didn't even know was there? Fear of the other, someone who doesn't look like me, fear of Black people if I'm white, for example. Why? Because I've been culturally conditioned to have that experience. Or am I really being threatened? Is there an external threat? Well, there wasn't. I mean, these guys were just sitting there, And so all of us we're all having these experiences around race and ethnicity that we need to take a look at, particularly those of us who are in the wellness industry, because the research also shows that it is the bias, the unexamined bias of healthcare providers, wellness folks, that contributes to re-traumatizing and traumatizing people of color who are most vulnerable to race-based stress, stress and trauma, who experience continued threats to their emotional safety, to their physical safety, who are always on guard, trying to protect and defend against the possibility of an event. The other thing that's true about race-based stress and trauma is that it's always sudden, it's never expected, and it's not controllable. And one of the impacts of events like this tends to be the person who's experienced it wonders, was there something I could have done? Was it me? Why did this happen? All of that rumination goes on. And what this particular model tells us is that whatever your response is to the injury, to the emotional injury, is normal. It's an adaptive response. It is not pathological. It does not mean there's something wrong with you. This is a critically important distinction between race-based stress and trauma and that model. And it fits perfectly within the wellness paradigm that we all function in. There's nothing wrong with you. You are having an experience that makes sense, because who wouldn't be upset if you were handcuffed, arrested, and held for 9 hours because you were just sitting someplace and you were the only Black people in the room? So, I mean, all the witnesses said it was clear to them that the only difference between these guys who were arrested and everybody else was race.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a lot. And then I can talk about PTSD if you like.
No, yeah, let's talk about that. I just want to kind of reiterate, because in your book, you're saying
Mhm.
ethnic and race-based traumatic stress injury, like you said before, it's ongoing, it's sudden, it's recurrent, it's cumulative. And bottom line, it's not something you get over easily or quickly, right? And you also say like the trauma is likely to occur anytime, anywhere, and without warning.
That's
But
right.
it's easy to look and say, oh, this is a one-time event, but no, it's always there. It's cumulative. Not to go far down a rabbit hole, but you talk about this as well. Like it goes back to your ancestral history as well, even if you haven't had per se an actual incident or event. So it's this cumulative piece that I find that to be, really important and interesting.
Well, it's what makes it different from post-traumatic. One of the things that makes it different.
Right.
Post-traumatic stress disorder diagnosis. So post-traumatic stress disorder, as defined in the DSM-5, the manual that psychologists and psychiatrists use to diagnose people, is considered, number one, a medical and psychiatric disorder. Something wrong with you. Caused by a life-threatening event that happened in the past, that the individual has not been able to process, digest, and move beyond. And that even after treatment, sometimes these experiences will resurface, so that it's considered to be a chronic condition. And it's treated that way. So that's very different than an approach you would take as wellness coaches. I know you know what I'm talking about. It's different than an approach you would take when you realize that, or when you consider that one is an injury, another is a disorder. You would treat a disorder differently than you would treat an injury. When you're injured, when you're hurt, what do? You take action to heal the injury. And then you get on with your life. See? Mm-hmm. From a healed place. I mean, that's what we should be doing. We don't always do that either. I mean, a lot of us get injured and keep going, and then we hurt ourselves more. So, that's a whole nother dynamic. But, so when you have a disorder, the presumption is that you shouldn't still be experiencing this. Mm-hmm. There's something in you that we need to work with to help you stop having to have this experience. That's a very different approach. I hope that's clear.
I think I hear what you're saying. And in the case of race-based traumatic stress, you're calling it an injury because it's not something that per se needs to be like, it's not your fault. It doesn't necessarily need to be fixed. It just is.
Your feelings should be hurt.
Yeah, right.
If your feelings are not hurt, what's up with that? It's almost that approach. Instead of trying to talk someone into feeling something different than they feel, or questioning the response, meaning it's an adaptive response to pain. Mm-hmm. So what's interesting about that, by the way, is particularly for people who are having direct experiences of racial stress and trauma, when they hear that, it's one of the first things I say: you're not crazy, you're just hurt. There is such a sense of relief. And people will say, oh my God, I knew there was nothing. I knew it. I knew there was nothing wrong with me. Mm-hmm. So in this culture, we kind of internalize, because this is very complex, but in this culture, we sort of internalize a sense of there must be something wrong with me for having this reaction. Why? Because in the dominant culture, there's denial mm-hmm. that this is occurring. Well, no, come on, you're overreacting, or, oh, come on, that had nothing to do with race, or, yeah, no, I don't have a racist bone in my body, that kind of stuff. So there you are left with wondering, well, was it me? No, no, it wasn't.
Right. And then you don't get to heal that injury, right? Because it's not acknowledged. And I just want to back up and say this for everybody on the call, because you might be thinking to yourself, well, What does this have to do with wellness coaching? If you guys, and Dr. Parker, you may not be familiar with we have multiple systems and kind of paradigms, but one of them is Wellness 360, which is the call we're on today. And if you think of the 12 elements of the wheel and how we work with this holistic approach, right, guys, it's an interconnection, right? So we don't take these kind of Band-Aid approaches. We look at, okay, how are all these things interconnected across these different layers? And so if you have a client coming to you who's experienced race-based stress and trauma and is carrying that, and you're trying to do a Band-Aid approach and tell them, here's how to fix your stress, or here's what you should do to fix your food, but you don't see the bigger context here of where this is coming from, you're missing something, right? So that's one reason why we're having this conversation, because we need to have a broad perspective to be able to support people that are coming into our world, and also to really understand this for ourselves as people who are leaders out there in the wellness community, right? So this is huge. I love everything you're saying. Let's talk a little bit about, one of the questions we had was, who is actually directly impacted and how are they affected, and who's indirectly impacted and how are they affected? Because you talk about those who are directly impacted by race-based traumatic stress and those are indirectly, and kind of what's the difference there, and what do we need to know about that?
I'm thinking about how I want to answer that.
Okay. I take all the time you want.
I'm assuming that if you haven't seen the video, most of you are aware of the murder of George Floyd. Is that a fairly safe assumption?
I think so.
Who was directly impacted? I'm asking the question. Who was directly impacted? Do we have?
Oh, do you want some comments? If you guys want to answer in the thing, I mean, I could try to answer. I'm gonna say George Floyd, and anyone who feels he looked like George Floyd.
Right, that would be the obvious answer. George Floyd. What about the cop? What about the man who did it? What about his family, who now has to live with the fact that, oh, that was my husband, my son, my brother, my uncle, my grandfather. See, it's the absence of inclusion, of including oneself in the whole thing. So if we're talking about holistic practices here, we are all involved in this in various ways. How come? These are questions that I'm just inviting people to consider, to contemplate. One of the things that I know I talked about when you and I spoke, Suzanne, was about the process of self-study. So as wellness coaches, we have an obligation to engage in self-study, to ask ourselves, what is my relationship to my own race and ethnicity? That's where you start. My own race and ethnicity, not somebody else's. How do I experience being white? How do I experience being Black? How do I experience being Indigenous or Latinx, whatever one's cultural, racial, and ethnic identity is? How do I experience myself in that aspect of my identity? That's where you start, not how do I help other people.
And I love that. I mean, you've got to start with the self. We talk about that so much in coaching, and it's really kind of even how our program is designed. We start working on ourselves first, right? Because you have to. And in your book, you say, shining a light on your own thoughts, attitudes, beliefs about race and ethnicity, the ones you might have previously ignored, is how real change begins. And I love that. And yeah.
So, for example, if we go back to the George Floyd video, or the story, if you didn't see the video, how come the primary focus is on the man who was murdered? Why isn't it on the man who did the murder? Other than to be mad that he didn't, that action wasn't taken soon enough. What about that? How come I'm not seeing that? It becomes a question. That's a question of self-study. Did I see it? Did it ever occur to me that, oh yeah, he has a family too who is now impacted by this event? And anyway, where did he learn how to do that? Where is that come? How come he felt free to do that? I don't know. See, and And of course, as a person of color, it's like, so how is this impacting me? You know, there's such a thing as, and as, again, wellness coaches, you may or may not experience this, but there's such a thing as vicarious trauma. And that is observing the pain and suffering of another individual over time can also result in a vicarious experience of stress and trauma. And so we, again, as wellness coaches, we have to take care of ourselves as well. It is highly unlikely that anyone is going to come to you and say, I am coming to you because I want to deal with my race-based stress and trauma. I have never, in all my years of work, no one has ever come to me and said that. However, if you are an aware human being, if you're just now becoming aware, if you're just now waking up to the fact that, oh, this is really a thing, then it doesn't take much to figure out, you know, probably most people of color who are coming to me or not coming to me are having some of these experiences. It's probably the case. So then the question becomes, and this is tricky, you know, how do I hold the space for that individual so that if they choose to share that with me, if I create a safe enough space, a trusting enough relationship so that issues of race and ethnicity come up, can I hold the space? Can I sit in my own discomfort, maybe of my own hangups around it, long enough to support someone in moving through their pain and suffering? Have I dealt with my own pain and suffering well enough to be able to tolerate someone else's? That's our work, as far as I'm concerned. As coaches, therapists, you know, anyone who's trying to help another human being, you have to have dealt with your own unbearable suffering in order to be able to help someone else deal with theirs.
And, you know, yeah, I was just gonna say, we talk about that a lot here because there's this desire, especially as we're coming out in the world to be coaches and we're getting started as professionals. There's a part of us that wants to tell people what to do, to give advice, to kind of solve the problem versus holding the space, as you say, and we talk about that as well, for that healing to occur. There's a great story in your book about this. I want to tie in here because you talk about the yoga teacher who invited you. You had hurt your back. And he helped you, he invited you to come to class, even though you were like, hey, I can't do yoga anymore. And he helped you into the pose. I believe it was Supta Baddha Konasana. You went into this deep state of rest. And you said it wasn't just the pose, it was his presence. And so never underestimate the power of presence. Most powerful teachers and therapists, I'm going to add coaches in there, are those who can model this authentic presence and allow someone to have his or her own experience rather than trying to fix it or diagnose it or change it. I thought that was powerful.
Yeah, I thank you. I think it is too, when you realize that, oh, people aren't coming to you to be fixed. And to the extent that we think they are, what we're doing is buying into the myth that they're broken. And that's there's something wrong with you. See, people will come to you with that. I mean, nobody ever came to me and said, I'm great. You know, let's just talk about how great everything is. You know, they come with their problem, they present the problem, and I listen to the problem. And I realize that coaching is slightly different than psychotherapy, but I listen to the problem. And when they would finish, I'd say, well, and how are you hoping I can help? And they would explain to me how they thought I could help. And I would listen some more, and I would say, you know, one of the ways I think I can be most helpful is to support. You seem to have a PhD in knowing what's wrong with you. Everybody agrees. Yes, sure I do. How about if we begin to focus on what's right with you? What's going, you know, what's right with you? Well, then there'd be a big argument. No, you don't understand. This is what's wrong with me. You know, so that would go on for a while. And eventually, people would begin to settle into the contemplation of what is right with me. What's right with me? You know, it's not that there isn't this other stuff over here that exists, But I've never spent a lot of time wondering or thinking about or contemplating what's right with me. So what does that do? It brings us into balance. Yeah, we all have stuff that we know that we would regard as, I guess, wrong with us, that's in quotes. But we also have a lot of stuff that we know is right with us. How do we balance the two? That's the work, as far as I'm concerned. And I think that that's what we need to bring in. That's what I love about wellness coaching. You know, you're not dealing with the pathology as much as you are. It's not that it doesn't exist, it does.
Right.
So for example, with PTSD, I think about 25% of the population is diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And out of that 25%, what researchers have discovered is that there's a racial disparity, that African-American veterans are diagnosed at a 45 to 50% higher rate than white veterans. And Asian American veterans were, as it turns out, were diagnosed at a high rate as well. And what the researchers speculated is that it is because of unaddressed race-based stress and trauma that the rates of PTSD are diagnosed at higher rates in those populations. And so I'm thinking, if we can support someone in dealing with, in just acknowledging that it's a thing, it's really a thing, you know. It's stressful to be non-white in America. It just is. And that's said without shame, blame, or criticism. It just is. And I think that I'm thinking that more people are beginning to recognize that, to accept that without feeling defensive about it. Well, it wasn't my fault. Well, nobody said it was your fault. It just is, you know, nobody said it's your fault. And so it's those defensive responses also that I regard as evidence of unhealed stress and trauma around race and ethnicity. When you can't even have the conversation, when you have to defend yourself, when you're protecting something, what is that? What is that? Why is that necessary? What are you protecting? So those are some of the questions we ask ourselves as we take a deeper dive into, yeah, what is my relationship to this stuff? How come I'm uncomfortable with it? Why can't I talk about it? You know, one of the things that we know is that, you know, people don't want to be regarded as being racist, for example. Nobody wants that label. Nobody wants that designation. And so there's this kind of reflexive response to the possibility that that might even be a thing, you know, and that's understandable. But it's the same contraction, the same stress response that one would have if one is being discriminated against. It's this, you know, it's the same. The physiology is the same, the context is different.
That's interesting. You know, I know you talk, and I don't know if this is what you're getting into now, but it's reminding me of something you said in your book where you talked about these cultural blind spots that people have, and basically how the dominant cultural group norm is to do what you're saying, to avoid mentioning, to deny noticing any difference, or just to become defensive, or even take a superior stance if the topic comes up or one feels threatened. And you say that this conditioning, it's not relevant in a multiracial culture anymore. It's in our best interest to replace these outdated paradigms. But yet we may not have the tools. We don't know, but this is what we're being called, I believe, to do now. And it ties into this topic of people being colorblind. Are people really colorblind? I know that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you.
All right, we're gonna all do an exercise here, okay?
Okay.
So everybody hold your hand up so that you can see this part of your hand. Got it? All right, it's in front. Okay, now tell me what color you see. I see caramel. That's what I would call the color of my hand, caramel. Anybody gonna, we're gonna get feedback. It doesn't matter. Okay.
I feel like mine's like a cafe latte where it's like that caramel color, but somebody put some more milk in it.
Okay, so cafe latte, that's,
Yeah.
that's all right. I don't know.
Everybody, I'll tell you what people are saying over here in the chat. We have dark brown, beige, brown, light tan, beige, light brown, red, beige, white and freckly, tanned.
So are we colorblind? No,
Oh.
we are not. So, but we have been some of us have been conditioned to deny that in fact we see color. When in fact we know we do see color. We see blonde hair, we see brown hair, we see blue eyes, we see a blue wall behind me. We are a visual species, and we relate to each other based on visual cues that we get from one another. And we associate certain attributes to certain characteristics. We know this. So in the United States, we know that there's a skin color hierarchy. And there's a history behind the skin color hierarchy that places white at the top, black at the bottom, and various shades of brown in between. All right. We know this. When you're using, we also know that many people have learned that to admit to being able to see skin color is to be racist. So therefore, I mean, my white friends and I talk about this stuff, and they tell me this, and so therefore they don't want to have that experience of themselves, and so the denial of skin color, I guess, is a way of protecting themselves from the possibility. But here's the thing: when on top of number one, it's not true we don't see skin color, and it's not true that we don't make judgments based on skin color. It's also, when you deny that you see skin color, it's a way of maintaining that skin color hierarchy, and that hierarchy that says, I don't see skin color, which means I'm better than those of you who do. You see what I'm saying? This is all, it's subtle. I tell a story. This is one of my favorite stories to tell about the difference between skin color as a label and skin color as a descriptor. So here's another contemplation for self-study. How am I using skin color? Do I use it as a label, or do I use it as a descriptor? And the story I tell is that children know the difference. The children have not been acculturated to use it as a label yet. So one of my friends said her little boy came to her, he was about 6 years old, said, "Mommy, what color am I?" She said, "Well, what color do you think you are?" He said, "I don't know." She said, "Well, go get your box of crayons and we'll see." So he ran and got his little box of 8 crayons. He came back, he couldn't find his skin color. She said, "Well, go get your big box of 64. So he did. He ran and got his little box of 64 crayons. He looked and looked and looked and looked and looked. Finally, he found a color that he thought was his. He pulled it out. He said, "I think I'm this color. What color is this?" She said, "That's apricot." He said, "So you think I'm apricot?" She said, "Is that the color you see?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Well, there you go." He said, "Well, what color are you?" "What color do you think I am?" He looked and looked and looked and looked and looked. He found, remember burnt sienna? Do they even make it anymore?
I think so.
Look up burnt sienna. He looks at it, he looks at her, he thinks, "Oh, that's not right." So he puts it back. He finally finds brown. He said, "I think you're this color. Is that what color you are?" She says, "Is that what color you see?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Well, there you go." So a couple of weeks later, he said, "Oh, okay." A couple of weeks later, she picks him up from school. He's 6 years old. His little friend gets in the back seat of the car. And the little boy in the back seat of the car said, "How come you're white and your mommy's black?" And the little boy in the front seat said, "I'm not white, I'm apricot. And she's not black, she's brown. And besides, there's only one white person in the whole wide world, and his name is Michael Jackson." That's skin color as a descriptor. That is not skin color as a label.
Yeah.
So ask yourself, when I use, when I'm referencing skin color or thinking about it or refusing to use it, am I using it as a descriptor or as a label? It can be a very useful descriptor. you know, to help you. Well, you know so-and-so, that lady who blah, 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 blah. No, I don't know who that is. You say everything but, you know, she's got dark brown skin. Oh, so-and-so becomes the issue, you know. So that's skin color as a descriptor. The refusal to identify the skin color is skin color as a label. Is that clear?
It
So
is, and I'm gonna share a vulnerable moment here because I'll circle back around to this, and a couple of you ladies out there maybe have heard me share this before, but you know, as a white person, I think some of that there's a fear in that you are going to say the wrong color based off of what is the correct term in today's world. Sometimes it changes, and so you say, okay, I don't want to say, and I've asked, you guys know out there, my Black coaches who have lovingly guided me through our round tables, I said, should I say Black or should I say people of color? And we've had this conversation. So I want to bring that out here. And I'm not denying what you're saying here about cultural blind spots. I'm telling you that that's, I think, something that's going on in the back of people's heads sometimes. I'm going to get it wrong. I'm going to get it wrong, Dr. Parker, and then I'm going to be really embarrassed.
So therefore, I don't want to say anything.
Right.
So here's the thing. Number one, should I say Black or should I say people of color? That's a label. I am African American. Does my skin look black to you? No. No. You know, and I identify myself as Black and as African American. But my skin color does not, it's not black. It just isn't. Period, the end, goodbye. So to describe if you're trying to describe me to someone and you say my skin color, this is not a label. All right. I talk about those labels too in the book as well, but it gets to be tricky. I mean, don't get me wrong here. It's just, I'm as overwhelmed as everybody else about like, oh my God. But this is what I say about what you're talking about. You can either be right or you can be in relationship. Mm-hmm. If you need to be right, you're in trouble. You've limited yourself. If you're willing to be in relationship, because that's what we're talking about, then you have to be willing to be vulnerable. I'm glad you brought that up. We cannot be effective in this work if we're not willing to be vulnerable and to step into our own vulnerability and to maybe get it wrong. But this is where the skill comes in, and everyone doesn't have the skill, but this is part of the teaching. The skill comes in learning, okay, when I step on somebody's toes, when I get it wrong, and there's a rupture in the relationship, how do I repair the rupture? That's what this is about. You know, it's learning, okay, how do I, oops, I stepped on somebody's invisible landmine that I didn't know was around them and they didn't know it either.
Right.
You know?
And am I defensive or am I willing to learn and grow? And I think that's really what we're really talking about. And that's why we're here today. And I think what's, you know, in your book, you talk about this in sort of in this umbrella of the culture of silence. And it's the silence that divides us, not the conversations, you say. And that's what we're doing today. And you say we need to converse. You say conversation is the healing balm. And though it might be uncomfortable at first, the discomfort eases and the wounds of separation begin to heal.
And that's when, so here's the formula. When you make the relationship, that would be a capital R, equal to or greater than the issue or the task, you are in a functional relationship. You're in balance. When you make the issue or the task more important than the relationship, you're out of balance. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And what we have a tendency to do, especially when we get triggered, is we make the issue of race and ethnicity the thing, and we forget about the relationship. Mm-hmm. So our work, as far as I'm concerned, because healing takes place within the context of the relationship. Your coaching is effective within the context of the relationship you form with the people you're coaching. where trust is built. You might make a mistake. I mean, I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. You fix it. You figure out a way, and you don't fix it by defending yourself and explaining why you said what you said and why you did what you did. You fix it by reaching out to the person to try to gain understanding. I've been thinking a lot about this because I'm writing some more, and I was thinking about, I've been talking about expressing curiosity. And I'm wondering about that though, because I know that I don't like it when I feel like someone is asking me questions. Sometimes it feels just intrusive to be asked, like, how are you feeling now? Well, I mean, I don't experience that as an expression of empathy, nor do I experience it as a question that I feel like I want to answer, right? You know, I don't want to answer that. I don't want to have that conversation with you. And I don't want to have to tell you that. So I feel like I'm on the spot. I got to say something or I have to stay away. And I don't want that. So I was thinking, well, if you're not expressing curiosity, what are you doing? You are looking for understanding. I want to understand you. I want to understand you. I just want to understand you. And that is a feeling that that you bring to the relationship. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I'm just really resonating with this because I'm thinking this desire to want to understand others is so important for coaches because we get off of our own agenda. And when you have that curiosity to understand others, I mean, the possibility of really understanding and making that connection relationship wise, as you're saying, is like, it's profound. Versus if we're staying in our own court and we're trying to drive the show how we want it to go, like it's two different experiences as far as connection.
Put myself in your shoes. I'll give you an example, but I think this is relevant to, again, the work that we're all trying to do here. I went to American Psychological Association has a yearly conference, and I went last year because I needed to get my continuing education to renew my license. So I thought, okay, this is a quick way to do it. I'll do it. I was in a workshop that it was dealing with racial identity issues. I thought, well, that will be interesting just to see what's going on there. And we were asked to break up into groups of 3. There was an observer, a therapist, and a client. That was the roles we were playing. So because I was the senior and because I am claiming emeritus status these days, I said, I'll be the observer. There was a young African-American graduate student. And so I thought it would be good for her to be the therapist. And there was an experienced white therapist who we said, okay, well, you be the client. The scenario was a scenario about a young woman who had gone on vacation and gotten herself into some deep trouble, got involved with the wrong person, spent money she didn't have, had to borrow money. It was complex. It was an interesting scenario. And what was interesting was the young therapist didn't know it. She got overwhelmed because she said she had been in that situation and didn't know what to do. But the white therapist said something so interesting to me. She said, I can't do this because I can't imagine what it's like to be Black. See, that's making the issue more important than what's happening here. And so I looked at her and I said, well, can you imagine what it's like to be human? You know, so, this is a human experience that we're talking about here. So that's an example of some of the blinders that we all have about certain issues. But again, that's an important, I think, experience for deeper self-inquiry. How come that was my response? Why couldn't I? How come I have to imagine being Black instead of recognizing that, no, this is a human dilemma that we're talking about here. Race didn't have anything to do with it, except that happened to be the topic of, the thing. So you get confused and think that, oh, that's what this is about. This is about being human. We know this. This is about being human. This is not to deny or diminish or erase issues that have to do with our race and ethnicity, but it's about understanding your own self first. If you understand you, there's a better chance that you can understand me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I mean,
That's
that's
the
why
starting
I'm
point.
saying, yeah, first look within. Let's start with self. You know, why did I come to this webinar today? Well, you know, what about this interested me? Um, how is it resonating with me? What is resonating? What isn't? What's relevant? What isn't? I mean, this is the self-inquiry. Why do I like it? Why don't I? What turns me on? What turns me off? All of that. That's the inquiry.
Yep. And being willing to do that. That's really the work of those of us here in the healing space. If you want to help others to heal, you've got to start with yourself. I'm proud of all of you who are here today and those who are watching the replay to begin this journey with us. And Dr. Parker, I do want to circle back around. I know we have a limited time. We talked about, why it's important for wellness coaches and holistic professionals to be considering this. And one thing I wanted to mention in your book that you talk about, which I think is also interesting, because you said, clients may come to you and they're not going to say, hey, I'm here because I have race-based stress. Right. You talk about the research of Sherman James, I believe, who looked at these health disparities between African Americans and European Americans. And he found that because of the physical exertion of hard work and the prolonged effort to overcome and eliminate these barriers in society to success and equality, that African Americans are disproportionately vulnerable to stress-related illnesses like cardiovascular disease, like hypertension, like metabolic disease, like depression. The list goes on because of living with the stress and fear every day and the work they have to do at the same time to overcome barriers. So, hey, somebody may not be showing up saying this is what's going on, but in the whole context here, especially with the research he found, these things are manifesting also in the physical form in diseases. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think you said, you said a lot of it. And Leith Mullings also did research and she on this topic, and hers was more gender specific, and explained why African-American women, for example, because of this behavior that is called high effort coping. That's what we call it in behavioral health, high effort coping, which is a behavior that James discovered began after the emancipation, after the Civil War, when African Americans, in an attempt to overcome the psychosocial barriers to equality and success that were placed in the way, worked extra hard to overcome those barriers. I think this is an important thing to know culturally, if you don't already know it. Most Black people, most African Americans, and I can speak with authority on our culture, and I suspect it may be true of others, have been taught in order to get half as far, you got to do twice as much. Or what I call the 200% lesson, which is you got to be 200% better to be equal. So that's in our DNA. I mean, that just sort of gets passed down from generation to generation. So we're showing up at 200%. This is stressful, and when you're showing up with that level of working really hard to be the best you can possibly be all the time, and you are not getting anywhere with it because of these barriers that are in place that you didn't have anything to do with, but you're trying to overcome them. This predisposes you to stress-related illnesses. It predisposes women to low birth rate babies, to more infant mortality, to death from pregnancy. I mean, these are serious issues. So here's the thing. If we can teach our clients self-care practices that support rest and recovery and relaxation, which restorative yoga is one of those practices that does that. It evokes the relaxation response, which is a real physiologic response that brings the nervous system into balance and offers rest and recovery and growth. If people have that available to them, and because they're self-care practices, once you learn it, you can do it yourself. You don't have to go most yoga studios have closed down now anyway. So, but you can do these practices on your own and realize, you know what, I need to make sure that, and this is for everybody, this really is for everyone. I need to make sure that I am balancing my hard work and effort with ease and comfort. Hmm. It's really, 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 it is no more complicated than that. It is no more complicated than that. What are you doing? How are you under stress? I don't know if you would ask anybody that, but I wouldn't, but but some kind of way stress comes up. What are you doing to take care of yourself these days? How's that going for you? What's keeping you from, are you getting enough rest? Are you getting enough, those are the kinds of questions. It's interesting because our time is getting close to an end, but in her book, Becoming, Michelle Obama talks about she said, I learned to march to the beat of unending effort to achieve a goal and a willingness to tolerate misery to gain approval. When that becomes a lifestyle, you may end up being really, really, really successful. At what price? At what price? See, so this is a lot.
Yeah. And what I'll say, you guys, in the book, we've kind of just we've just skimmed the surface. Let's just say that, right? We've talked about what we're talking about here. In the second half of the book, what I love is you get into these different restorative poses that anybody can do. I tried one the other night. I can't tell you guys, I was like, wow, this feels good, right? And so yes, this is for you. This is for anyone experiencing race-based stress, those directly impacted, those not indirectly impacted. It could be for your clients. It could be for right now, for the stress that you're feeling. So I highly recommend checking this out. And it's really a resource that you can go back to. There's so many different reflections and exercises in here. I know we can't get into all the poses today. That'd be fun to have you back for another one. What I want to do in our time remaining, Dr. Parker, if you're open to it, I have a sense there might be some important questions out there from our coaches in training and who maybe have some questions for you. So if you don't mind, let's just see if there's any questions that we can take live, and then we'll kind of circle back around, make sure we didn't miss anything. So let's look out there. If anybody's on video and you have a question for Dr. Parker and you want to take it live, just simply raise your hand. Oh, I see some questions right away. I'm going to go to Michelle and then I'll go to Scott. Let me unmute you there, Michelle. Let's see if we can hear you. Hey, Michelle.
Hi, good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Parker. What an honor to learn from you. So thank you so much. It's such a timely time. I am currently leading monthly workshops for yoga instructors called Yoga and Anti-Racism. And I am in the midst of everything that you're talking about. And I wanted to ask you regarding the race-based trauma, because so many of the yoga teachers are trying to, in their spaces, virtual or otherwise, support people in their own practices and also invite diversity. So one of the questions is how can they be more open and sensitive to that without re-traumatizing by naming it specifically. So in terms of, like, say they're having a class, they see that maybe there are 3 African Americans who join the class. So they want to have this experience of really making sure that they're addressing it, but they don't want to call out these 3 people. So I'm curious on how you can advise how to support those teachers and help them to really bring in that fullness. I have my answers, but I definitely would love to hear your expertise on that.
One of the questions that I pose in the book is to ask people who ask questions, what do you know about the answer to your question? So I'm going to start by asking you, what are your answers to that? And then I'll share with you mine, but go ahead.
Oh, you want to know what I tell people?
Yeah.
Okay, well, people that I talk with, I'm always about leveling the playing field. So I always tell them, why are you looking at their skin color? Why don't you just recognize that everybody, if you're breathing and you're human, everyone's experiencing trauma right now. So why not just base it on a place of really supporting those attendees, whomever they are, and supporting everyone in their trauma, and really speaking to all that's happening, and whatever it resonates for the particular individual, they'll receive, rather than highlighting. Because part of my work in the workshops is trying to bring what's unifying us rather than what's dividing us, and what the differences are. So that's basically my answer that I give.
And what do they say?
They usually nod and say, "Oh, yeah, I never thought about that."
Right, exactly. So that's the answer. I mean, and a shorter way of saying it is, you can either it's about the relationship. You know, it's not about the issue or the task here. It's not about the yoga. It's not about anti-racism. It's about, am I willing to enter into relationship with every single human being in the room? And then if issues of race and ethnicity surface, am I prepared to skillfully manage those issues when they come up? I mean, that's the work. You know, can I skillfully manage it when it comes up? I don't have to bring it up. You don't have to bring it up. These issues will come up if in an environment that is trusting enough, when you have created enough trust between you and your students, regardless of race or ethnicity. If an issue of race or ethnicity comes up that is relevant to them, they will bring it to you. How's that?
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Michelle. Let's head over to Scott, who had a question as well. See if I can unmute you there, Scott. You might have to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
There you go. Hi, Scott.
Hey. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Parker. Like Michelle was saying, really appreciate you being here. And then my question is, do you think that race-based trauma or trauma of other types can be passed from one generation to the next through like the DNA or in some other way, as if someone's like grandparent was like an abusive slavery relationship or something like that?
Well, you know, now I am not an expert on epigenetics, so I cannot speak. I can stay on the surface of the conversation, which I do indicate in the book. We have what we call traumatic retentions. Mm-hmm. Stress and trauma land in the body. They are not cognitive experiences. They are physical experiences. And when we haven't processed our stress and trauma, it stays within us. And it does impact the way genes express themselves. It doesn't change your DNA, but it can impact gene expression, which means you might be more vulnerable, for example, to certain stress-related illnesses than you wouldn't under different circumstances. So if the mother, for example, is stressed out during pregnancy, those stress hormones impact the fetus, and stress responses impact the fetus. And so then on top of that, the behaviors, the adaptive behaviors that people have used that they aren't necessarily paying attention to anymore, get passed on from one generation to the next. So for example, the 200% better syndrome, you know, you're not thinking about it anymore. You're not recognizing that, wait a minute, I need time out. I need things that balance this out. You're just always giving 200% all the time, no matter what, and wondering why you burn out. Yeah. So this is how we are impacted, and this is how ancestral memory is passed on. So I say that we right now, especially those of you who are younger, the work right now is we can heal. I mean, this is what the yogis tell us. The wisdom traditions say that you can heal 7 generations behind you and 7 generations going forward when you do this work.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a great question. Love it. Thank you so much, Scott. Let's take one more question. We got one more question in the chat here from Danielle, who's saying, if someone you care about is in denial about their racism or their own trauma, and you try to initiate a conversation about it, how do you preserve the relationship without letting them continue to be naive about the subject?
Well, good luck with that. I learned in graduate school, because I used to do that, because I thought I knew stuff. So I would just sort of insist that what I saw was the way it was. I still do it sometimes. And that you should not be in denial about what you're in denial about. But you can't make someone who's in denial not be in denial. Denial works. It is effective. But this is one of the things that I think we can empathize with is denial is a self-protective mechanism. It's a guard against some deeper pain that the individual doesn't want to deal with or doesn't know how to deal with. So for example, we know in alcoholic families, for example, denial is the way, it's the way people function. See no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And even when people are no longer using alcohol, they still do that behavior. So this kind of gets back to what Scott was talking about. We pass these behaviors on. So when you know that there's someone in denial about something that you think they shouldn't be in denial about, what I would recommend, because I'm always, I'll share this. This is good here. So there's serenity prayer, which is, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. That's what is used in AA, by the way. But there's a serenity prayer remix. That's what I call it. This is what I'm going to share with you right now. And it goes like this. God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change. Courage to change the one I can, and wisdom to know it's me. If somebody else's denial is bothering you, then I think that where we begin with self-study is, okay, what about this is so troublesome to me? What about this is so troublesome to me? And if it has to do with, I don't know if I can stay in the relationship with this person as long as they're in denial, then just go deeper into that inquiry. Why not? What about, is this really a deal breaker for me? It might be, I don't know. But self-inquiry requires continual questioning. You don't stop at the first answer. You say, okay, well, why not? And why not? And why not? And why not? And at the bottom of all of that, you'll find your healing, I think. Does that make sense? I know it probably isn't what you want to hear, but.
Well, I love it. And I'll just point out, you kind of get into this in sort of a side topic in the book on spiritual activism, which I think would be a great read for the person asking this question, as well as everybody, about, kind of waiting till disturbances pass to make peace with the situation before you take action. Then you can take this wise action. I love what you're talking about there. I know we don't have too much time to go into it, but that's the point, guys. There's so many juicy nuggets in the book. Definitely get the book. People are saying such amazing things in the chat right now. Dr. Parker, I don't know if you can see it, but I'll tell you that they're so grateful for this call. They wish we were here for at least 2 hours. And so we can't be together for 2 hours, but let's say this. Is there anything else important that I want to direct people how they can learn more from you in a minute. But before we do that, is there anything else that you feel is important to say today, or any topic we didn't cover that you wanted to comment on?
Just one thing that you said that I wanted to highlight. You said that, look, you don't have to care about yoga or practice yoga to benefit from this book. Yoga was the umbrella I used to highlight this topic. It is really about how to deal with one's own issues and hang-ups around, and unhealed stress and trauma around issues of race and ethnicity. And we all have them. Every single one of us has them. No one is immune here. Nobody is immune. And I think that we live in a multicultural, multiracial world. And it is incumbent upon each of us, particularly those of us who call ourselves helping other people, to be conversant, to be students of this topic. And again, we start by going within. What is my relationship to all of this before we go outside?
I'm so glad you said that again. We love systems and processes here at the IAWP. And as you've been talking and throughout your book, but I just kind of pull out, there's really a system here for wellness coaches, right? As you said, you have this awareness, you're here on this call, you're willing to have this exploration, but then you go to what you just said, inner work is really your first step, right? And you're looking at yourself. Then I jotted this down over here. Then step 2 is that relationship, right? Wanting to understand another person, having that curiosity. And then there's probably more steps in between, but the big piece you also talk about, which people can learn more about in the book, is then how do we heal with this self-care and these different things that we can do to support ourselves and our clients and the people's lives that we're touching. So amazing just to know that there's more work to do and that the resource is here to help us do it, Dr. Parker.
Lifelong work. And I would just suggest that we also, I'm doing this to change the language from healing to recovery. Recovery and resilience, you know, that we want to be able to bounce back. We want to be able to recover. And so this is an ongoing, continual practice. It's not, okay, that's it, I'm done, which we always think. And then we get triggered again. We say, oh, I thought I was done with that. But we're not, you know, so.
Yeah.
And we support each other in the work. That's really important also.
That's huge. Absolutely. And where can people, first of all, where can people get the book and where can they learn more about you? Because they wanted a 2-hour workshop, so they might want to be following you and hearing other things you have to say.
Okay. So the book, you can get the book on Amazon, or you can get it, I think Target and Barnes & Noble sell it online, or you can get it directly from the publisher. You have lots of options here. You can go to my website if you want to know more about me. Do I say it?
Yes, please go ahead.
It is very simple, drgailparker.com, GAIL Parker.com. What else? I'm doing, right now I'm doing a lot to having a lot of conversations with people around the book. So I'm not doing any so-called trainings right now, but that will be coming. So, and all of that stuff will be on my website.
Great. And I put that in the chat as well, drgailparker.com. And, you know, I just want to end by reading this little part of your book, which is one of the reflection exercises, Dr. Parker, which I loved. And you call it Make a Way Out of No Way, which I think can kind of help us as a starting point, really during these uncertain times that we're in today. You say, contentment is not the same as happiness. We all face difficult times in our lives, but it is possible to find contentment even in painful circumstances through acceptance of the situation. No matter what your situation, there's always the possibility of living life more fully. And as we cultivate this attitude within ourselves, we become more stable in our ability to remain joyful, even when things don't go as planned or as we hoped they would. I loved that. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. Again, we would love to spend even more time with you. We know you're busy out there doing all the work that you're doing in the world. Thank you so much for coming to the IAWP today and talking with all of our wellness coaches here. And I know they really enjoyed the call and we enjoyed having you. So thank you again.
Thank you. I enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care. Thank you for joining me for today's episode of Live Well, Dream Big. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation, and I want to invite you to take your next step toward living well and dreaming big by downloading the Live Well, Dream Big lifestyle book. It's the ultimate guide to becoming your best self and living life on your own terms. You can grab your complimentary copy by going to the link in the show notes or heading directly to iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide. That's iawpwellnesscoach.com/guide.